Good afternoon. The opinions here are that of my own, mine only, and nobody has encouraged me to turn around and make these opinions. In today's blog post, I will be talking about Alan Greenspan's argument for the counteraction and the collapse of Lehman Brothers and the effects that it had on Citibank within global markets. First, I want to start off by showing a book, then some notes, and then third, going through the process to explain what happened. To some people reading this blog post, I will be dumbing it down. For other people that are within the SEC, I'll also explain under tort law where the compliance issue and the breakdown happens. First, we're going to start with the book. The book is called Engineering Economic Analysis. It's the 11th edition. It's what they use right now at MIT and Harvard for an economic analysis in engineering. Second, I'm going to go and I'm going to heighten what is going to be known as arithmetic gradient functions. First one is going to be the one that's present worth and the one that's for uniform series. The one here for uniform series was going to be needed to be heightened, especially this one right here. For people in the financial industry, you'll understand. Now on to my notes. So in global markets, under the Gramm-Leach-Bailey Act, it allowed for companies to turn around and hedge. What had happened is within a company structure, each one of the companies have different viewpoints where they're hedging. Meanings that this would be, A would be checking, B would be savings, third would be private wealth management, fourth would be loans, fifth would be small business loans, five would be capital reserves, six would be hard assets, etc. Now, why is that important? Under arithmetic gradient uniform series, a company is known as 0 or A, to be exact. In this example, we're going to use Lehman Brothers. Lehman Brothers had subsidies all over the world based on their credit default rate and their bond. Now, why is that important? Under bilateral and horizontal trade, we see the examples of here. As people know, remember, in 2008, we had an issue with the first beginning with commodity output happening in end of February going into March of 2007, which then trickled down and affected the rest of the world. More importantly, under the Gramm-Leach-Bailey Act, we saw that the EU, and because of capital flows, was hedging. What this means is Lehman subsidiary from the EU, between all of its other subsidiaries, owned and controlled 61% of the outstanding credit ratings and credit bonds for the EU. How is this possible? This is horizontal trade. This is bilateral trade. Bilateral trade still goes into a parent subsidy if you're owning interbanking relationships. This is most known and it can be seen in today's present world by what we call the London Whale. Thus, the justification, according to Jamie Dimon and J.P. Morgan, of it that it was just an interbank relationship. Now, why is that important? According to my personal math, the gradient personality for Lehman Brothers was a breakdown of 4 subsidiaries. These 4 main subsidiaries controlled, in my personal understanding of math, 61% of the outstanding bonds for the EU. This meaning within the 4 subsidiaries, alpha was never defined by 51%, but was defined by 27, 5, 15, and 14. Meaning that they were using interbanking relationships and within the binomial distribution pattern between the too big to fail banks to control it. What that means is within each one of these subsidiaries, you still see how there are certain market players. The 18, the 25, the 15 would have a bigger effect on the market than a 5 or a 10. Thus, meaning alpha has changed. This is the argument that I made within my political theory class, changing within niche markets and niche market demographics for political isolation. The best way to understand that would be conservative blue dog Democrats and moderate Republicans or libertarians, as we know here in the U.S. Now, how do I know this? In most trade, we have a hierarchical structure from the business, meaning that there's divisions within divisions. Under Graham-Leach-Bailey Act, each one of the structures from a corporate aspect means that they could hedge. Why? How did the hedge come about? When executives were tying their pay to the stock value then turn around is hedged in a different mentality. When you increase mortgages, most people think that we're just increasing the balance sheet for the CDOs and the MBSs on the reserves. Most people are forgetting that also increases private wealth management, checking and savings account, but more importantly, credit lines within the corporate structure. To my friend in New York, Miss Hayes, this is why corporate bonds was the comment that I turned around and emailed you about. Now, to make this more of an example, I am adopted. Home A is of my adopted parent who lives in northern Indiana in South Bend. Second house would be house B of my adopted parent who lives in Parchment/Richland in Michigan. C would be my adopted sister in Detroit, and D would be the house that my adopted family owned in South Haven. Now, under this understanding in statistical business mathematics, we are defined. Risk is defined by a thing called p hat, or a p hat value. If we were to take each one of these four equations and give it each a half a percent, everybody will say that based on the geographical location of the town, that my sister probably has the biggest market. That is incorrect. The one with the most volatility is going to be the house in South Haven, depending on seasonal aspect. In trigonometry, this is known as energy cosine, which is defining based on a certain subvariable, or theta, as it's known in Greek, as a difference. Which that means then, depending on the time of the year, and depending on when the bonds were being offered and when they were going about to structure in a group setting, just based on seasonal attribute, the house in South Haven for us as a family has a $15,000 to $20,000 difference just based on the time of the year that you would sell the home. Meaning, if we sold our house in winter, it'd be $20,000 less than if we sold the house in summer. Now, why is this important? Under gradient mathematics, we create a hierarchical system using every one of the subsidiaries. Now, even within the system, you have a cash flow payment known as AG1, AG2, AG3 for each one of the lines. That is identical for what was happening within each one of the houses within the bond or the MBS bond. Now, based on seasonal attributes and this being different, we can identify that this portion of the bond rating, which should have normally have been an A, was now only a B. B bonds being C, C bonds being D, etc., etc. Now, to my friends in New York, you asked how I was able to understand 4.2 trillion and my math after the previous taper. Under basic mathematics and human capital development theory, we are able to identify base behavior mechanisms, meaning even in sub-niches that there's certain buying behavior. I'll take the example of just something local. We call my age demographic that does hip-hop, rockers, women that define themselves as blondes, rednecks, and student housing. Now, why did I choose this? These are all sub-mortgages, are sub-ideas within the broad structure of human population demographics or human capital development. thus meaning that they have certain niche buying demographics. The way Wall Street saw this as Nike, Reebok, Live Nation, Harley, Coors, Tiffany, GM, Ford, Goldman Sachs, KKR, and BlackRock releasing all this year all the different focuses on their IPOs or the current stock being heightened. Now, why is this important? Within gradient mathematics, when we look at a capital structure for worldwide insurance, alpha now is defined based on a smaller margin, meaning that is no longer prevalent. That is defined within calculus as y, x-axis within the bell curve. The bell curve has each distributional channels. These distributional channels both come horizontally and vertically, meaning that within a hierarchical structure, what happens in savings will directly affect then what happens in credit lines into checking into private wealth management, business loans, etc. This is the same argument that the lady from the Federal Reserve of Kansas City, Esther George, makes within understanding C&I loans for businesses right now based on commodity structure. Now, why was I able to call the math correct for the taper? The Federal Reserve right now is using earnings release under our understanding of X1 over E sin delta 2 over X2. This is how they are seeing the market, meaning that they're competing world. X1 being us, stock market, the economy being F, the energy is based on time variance, and X2 being competing in the world. This is why we've seen movement within the bond market to shorter term treasury yields compared to longer term treasury yields. Now, to go back to my argument for Alan Greenspan. Alan Greenspan makes an argument within binomial distribution that Citigroup had just as much as a direct effect on the market as Lehman Brothers. Even within too big to fail banks, within binomial distribution patterns, we create a market on logarithms using prime numbering. Prime numbering is defined as 1, 3, 5, 7. If you know it and you can look in basic option analysis, this is defined. First three would be too big to fail. Third three would be smaller banks, and then the other third within the mathematics would be worldwide trade, and then one being us as the population and the consumer. This would be broken down in binomial distribution as here's 3, here's 3, here's 3, and here's 1. And this right here is pop demo. That is the 2.5 or 0.25, 0.05, .009, or no, excuse me, yeah, and then 0.001. Now, this is how all logarithms in computer science sees our buying behavior, especially on things like the ARC, which is known as the New York Stock Exchange, is a regulatory form with the collapse of Knight Capital. How even when I was able to talk to the regional managing director for Knight Capital, I told them 3 years ago that they were going to see an issue based on the leverage analysis when it happened. Now, with knowing about that and knowing that this is the function, within too big to fail banks, you have the 0.25. This is again a 0.0005 derivative, meaning that the binomial distribution within the pattern is still somebody is hedging something else. In the market, Lehman Brothers was this portion of the market, meaning go back to horizontal and bilateral trade within network analysis. With that portion of the L, Citigroup was this portion of the L. meaning that the network, this was the market player, which in each one of the particle distribution, or as I mentioned it, being able to give and take to make a profit. But instead of it being in thousands, it's in pennies times volume. Now, why is this important? Under tort law, Citigroup was not held in compliance due to the fact of the ethics that they believe. This was known as a version of portfolio hedging. This is the same argument JP Morgan gave for the London whale, and why JP Morgan was able to classify this to his shareholders, and any of the civil lawsuits against JP Morgan was not in existence. Brownian movement, which is a form of natural physics, which is the same thing that's used to be able to understand the Elliott waves used in understanding binary and Fibonacci sequences within mathematics and derivatives, are defined based on an up and down ratio. Meaning, it looks like this with a market player. Now, if here was Lehman Brothers, Citi had to be X. So at both times they were hedging each other. This is basic gradient mathematics. By knowing this is able to cause a ripple within the market, not only from the hedge positions of those two, but the banks that also hedge their positions in those two other organizations as well. The Graham-Bailey Act allowed for companies to take and turn around from a corporate strategy standpoint and leverage their own earnings to turn around, tying it to the credit. Now, why is that important? If I create a pyramid-based structure within my company, I, as the top executive, would offer you as the low worker and the bank teller 3% of what it is. Mid-level managers maybe 3.5, 3.1. I as the upper level executive 3 and then the stockholder 1%. This is the reason that this is identified and is known as within gradient mathematics. This is the hedge analysis from the original, excuse me for a second, from the original hedge. What that means and how that is defined is right here. This is the amount. Excuse me. I apologize about this. The amount is right here. The price, so the price of the stock. I, the implied volume. 1 being us as the consumer. I, the implied amount, and over time. This is the same exact mathematics, and N is the derivative. N meaning the justification of time. This is why within the bond market we've seen a movement since the Federal Reserve tapering was before to short-term yield bonds compared to long-term asset bonds. This is why we've also seen a migration into municipal bonds, but more importantly, of the Fortune 5,000 companies that we have, and of the S&P 500 companies, over 90% of them offer a dividend now, meaning that they're hedging on their capital balance sheet from long-term aspect approach. The justification that they're giving it is just for insurance purposes. Within an insurance industry, who no longer alpha is defined with a statistical error and a statistical message of, let's say, 5 or 7, what it was pre the 2008 financial crisis. Now we're seeing it at 14 to 18. This can be justified under tort law and under the baby boomers as the older demographic, dying and retiring, our age, not finding jobs, etc., etc., etc. More importantly, what it is these Fortune 500 company to be able to understand growth and offer us as the American consumer who have a little bit of money. What they're doing is they're going to justify their growth by giving jobs overseas. We're just now seeing some migration. The jobs that are going to be here are going to be technical. Any other jobs are going to be part-time and seasonal. So for my age demographic, unless you're willing to work 60, 70 at between 8 and 12 bucks an hour, you're not really going to find full-time work with insurance. All of the other jobs that you're going to see are just going to be based seasonal. And what jobs you do see that are going to be full-time with insurance are going to be highly technical jobs. This is why my argument is that we create financial literacy within the educational community, but more importantly, why we see we need a migration into entrepreneurship, into school management. And the reason that we don't right now is my personal belief is the power of the teachers union at these universities. In my own personal experience, these are no different than watching Congress fight. Yes, it will eventually get done, but sometimes it'll be after the fact. If anybody else would like to understand more about what I'm talking about, please, I would ask you to Google arithmetic gradient uniform series. This is the bill processing. G, which is going to be known in it, is the gradient. That would be known as the company. The amount is the amount of cash or assets, basic accounting stuff. The N will be known as time, and the I is the implied amount. It is that implied amount which creates the spread and the derivative. This is the same market why we've seen within the grocery sectors used to mark down a little bit more stuff but have a higher volume. This is why the Federal Reserve is counting on a higher volume of commodity exports come the second week of February, or third week of February, second week of March. If we do not see it, it is my personal belief that we will see a 10 to 15% movement within the market. The other thing at this time that's being presented is GMO, which is a genetically modified ability for public corporations to heighten the commodity cycle. If we've noticed from abroad, GMOs are not being accepted abroad due to the fact of what they believe to have mutational aspects of us as a human species. Why this is important. In places like Iowa, Missouri, what we call the Green Belt, we've seen property prices go from $2,000 to $4,000 to up to $8,000 to $12,000. This means the output has to be higher based on volume. It is my personal belief if we do not see that, with issues that we are going to see in Washington this year, from the budget and the debt ceiling talk, this could be a very, very interesting year. If the budget talk and the debt ceiling is reached, and as long as commodity output, we will be able to escape quantitative easing, and we'd be able to turn around and see a rally in the market. To me, myself, these are the biggest issues that we need to address. Volume, output, and commodity-based assets, and issues in Washington, D.C. This is the isolation of certain variables. I would ask any of you, the next time you think about voting for somebody, you're thinking that your buying behavior does not dictate a portion of the economy. Remember, all it takes is 2 and 3 pennies for somebody to become wealthy. It is the same reason why Albert Einstein couldn't understand compound interest, quote unquote. And to his understanding, what compound interest was nothing but cellular mutation. So what I would ask you as voters, and more importantly as people on this, please understand that. To Mr. Greenspan, from a mathematical perspective, your argument on Citigroup is 100% right. They were the other portion of it. Instead of this it being in a penny, it was out 4 to 7 decimal places. That is where Citi made most of its money. This problem, though, cannot be or will never be addressed under tort law due to the fact that it will be considered internal portfolio hedging, which is something that we now as a community and as a country are just starting to get. This is why things like the Volcker rule need to be in existence, and more importantly, why regulators need to understand what they're doing. From a quantitative aspect, yes, money, it's more lucrative to work on Wall Street than it is as a regulator. But it is your job and our job as a community to make sure that things are ethical. I would ask that when we sit and we look at financial ethics, we take into existence that you're supposed to be working for the 99%, not the 1%. It is these small margins, from $1 for a transaction fee between interbanks to $3, depending on which one you're using, the geographical location, that the Senate Banking Committee, that us as consumers need to pay attention to. These little things will mean that we're always fighting. And as long as there's a performance reward system, no wonder issues like this will always happen. This is an indirect form of self-greed, and that it's no different than anything else anybody else do. You can call having a significant other greed. You can call your house greed. Eating, you could call being a form of greed. So what getting over on somebody is too. This is why myself, I believe in liberty, and I read the works of our founding fathers. To everybody that has paid this attention and this long in the blog, thank you and have a great day. And I wish you guys all a happy new year and be safe.